This is Demon1, a rising star within the Valorant scene due to his relentless aggression and world-class peaks. In this video, we're going to be explaining peaking in 4 different levels, starting from beginner level and making our way up to pro to see why Demon1 is so deadly. Now let's start off with Keystone, who's ranked bronze and is playing Sky on Split. If we hop into the first round of this game, we can see that Keystone's team is poised for a hit towards B site. Now after the initial utility dump, the smoke fades and Keystone's team decides to push forward onto B site. Cypher dies to the enemy shorty, but the Sage does provide some cover to push into site. The enemy Sova shoots a great dart to scan Keystone's entire team, giving them information that they are all located pillar. Now in an act of desperation, the friendly Omen runs full speed ahead and begins a firefight with the Sage located on rafters. Keystone opts to join this firefight, but sadly the Sage is able to retreat with her life spared. Now this is where we find our hero in the story making their first crucial mistake. If we go back a few moments, we can see that Keystone during the majority of this B site push is shift walking. The strength of shift walking is to conceal your positioning by not making any footsteps. But when your entire team is rushing into a bomb site, hiding your positioning should be the least of your concerns since they already know that your entire team is rushing into bomb site. Sova's dart scans the entire team and Keystone is still shift walking. This habit of shift walking makes Keystone way too slow to peek with the rest of her teammates, which resulted in the Sage getting away. If Keystone had chosen to peek with her teammates by sprinting rather than walking, they would have been able to peek into the Sage much earlier, giving them time to fire some more shots, lessening the chance that she actually ran away. Now, as a general rule, shift walk peeking is more often than not one of the worst peeks you can do since it's quite slow, giving the enemy team more time to line up a headshot or, in this case, more time to retreat back to safety. Peeking is generally a technique used to look for a fight, so the speed at which we do it is an important aspect of what makes a successful peek. And to really drive this point home here, let's fast forward to round 9 of this game. Near the end of this round, we see we're in a 4v1 situation. Now after a bit of searching for the Raze in B Heaven, Raze shows herself by emerging from the Omen's smoke. There's a bit of confusion from Keystone's end on where the shots are coming from, but after Keystone recognizes where the Raze is, they yet again decide to peek into Raze by shift walking out. This is a much more textbook case of what usually happens when attempting to take a fight by using a shift walk peek. When moving so slowly, you make the shot much easier to hit by giving the enemy more time to aim. If Keystone had chosen to peek by fully sprinting, they would have given themselves a much higher probability of not losing the duel. Now, as I watched a few more rounds, I could tell that there was a lack of control or comfortability with counter-strafing or strafe shooting in general. And I believe that these unideal peeks from Keystone are symptoms of the main issue of not being comfortable with stopping and then shooting. At the core of most peeks in Valorant, they all incorporate strafe shooting in some way, form, or fashion. Whether it's a jiggle peek, a tight peek, shift walk peek, or even a wide peek. In the end, your goal is to be able to stop on a dime and shoot the enemy with 100% bullet accuracy. So for many of you who are at the lower ranks here, the very first step to level up your peeks is by having a solid foundation of strafe shooting. If you want to go more in depth into the topic or are looking for a refresher, we do have a counter strafing and strafe shooting guide here at SkillCapped. The video is going to be linked here as well. Actually, if you're really looking to improve your mechanics, SkillCapped is by far the best place to do that. Here you can access premium Valorant courses on the internet that are broken down into short videos that can isolate and teach you the best tips in the game, which you can instantly apply. Our Master in Minutes courses, they're perfect to watch while you're in queue, waiting for your next match to pop. And with each course, you're quickly gonna learn the very best Valorant tips for every fundamental skill, which many of our members have never even heard of, making solo queue a lot more fun and allowing our members to climb stupidly fast. And the best part is, we guarantee that you're gonna climb at least 5 acts while using our service while using SkillCapped. So it's no risk to you, it's a guarantee. Check us out after this. For our intermediate level, we have Tommy, who's platinum ranked and is playing Sova on Ascent. Now, as we move up the ranks, our general control of being able to stop and then shoot gets a little bit more consistent, resulting in many more kills. However, our hero Tommy does make an error quite often that actually holds his peaks back from being much faster as well as more consistent. To break this down, let's take a look at round 18. After the first few seconds, Tommy's team communicates that the attackers are rushing B site. So with this, Tommy decides to immediately rotate over through CT spawn. In the midst of the chaos, Tommy recognizes that his Killjoy and KO need help on site, so they choose to peek out of the smoke. But this is where Tommy makes a mistake when it comes to peeking. Let's take a closer look at how Tommy chose to peek out of the smoke here. Let's take a moment to think of an answer to this question here. What was wrong with this peek? The answer is that Tommy peeked out of the smoke by moving diagonally rather than moving strictly horizontally. If we slow down the clip, we can see that Tommy actually moves out of the smoke in a diagonal fashion, or to be more precise, is using two directional keys, and in this case, it's W and A. A rule we want to always try our best to follow when it comes to our peeks is to peek by only moving with a single strafe key. This means moving with either the A key or the D key. This is due to how strafe shooting works in Valorant, where in order to have consistently accurate shots, we have to pause our movement and shoot when the game considers us stationary. The reason why moving diagonally makes achieving this goal a lot harder is now we have just effectively doubled the number of buttons we have to consider in order to counter-strafe. Having to press two keys to stop your diagonal momentum is infinitely times harder than just having to deal with pressing one key instead. Now, even for the people who choose not to counter-strafe and instead opt for the letting go of the key method of strafe shooting, this is still quite relevant because you're still doubling your chances of not timing the let go action of the key, since you may have accidentally held down one of the keys for too long. On top of all of this, another huge factor on why these diagonal peeks aren't perfect is because you're just peeking at a much slower speed. You may be technically moving at the same speed no matter if you're moving with two movement keys as opposed to one, but what we mean by moving slower is that from the perspective of the enemy, you're a much slower target when peeking diagonally versus peeking horizontally. Here's a side-by-side to display the speed difference between a diagonal peek and a horizontal peek. Now, similar to how we mentioned earlier in the video that shift walking into a peek is not the ideal because it's so slow, so this is the next step to making your peeks even faster. Strong peeks and fast peeks go hand in hand. To bring it back to Tommy, even though this improper peeking technique didn't have any effect on what happened when they exited the smoke, the same cannot be said for the next peek right after this. If we continue to watch the clip, we see that Tommy yet again goes for another diagonal peek from stairs towards B site. When they spot the Brimstone trying to kill their downed teammate, they begin to fire. And if we pay close attention to the first couple of shots from Tommy's spray, we can see that they were quite inaccurate due to still being affected by the movement error. This may or may not be due to his diagonal peeking, but it doesn't hurt to have proper peeking techniques so that we don't have to make it harder for ourselves to shoot quick but accurate bullets. Plus, it's always an added bonus to have much faster peeks anyways. If Tommy had chosen to peek using a method similar to this one, it would have been a bit easier to come to a complete stop after their peek. Regardless of this, Tommy is still able to clean up the remainder of the attackers, but we should always strive for much faster and cleaner peeks no matter the outcome of the round if our main goal is to improve. We've now moved up to our advanced level. We'll be taking a look at Teets, who's ranked Immortal and is playing Chamber on Heaven. A true characteristic of an advanced level player is that they're able to incorporate a level of consistency into their gameplay. Now, this manifests in how Teets chooses to peek when making his way to A lobby. In the very first round of this match, Teets moves into A lobby while focusing his crosshairs towards short. This is because a common play many defenders make is to peek from short into lobby for an early pick. However, this is not Teets' main goal. In a swift motion, he positions himself in the left corner of the room near the box, then peeks towards long A. Unfortunately, the dart exposes his positioning, making him a bit uncomfortable to stay, so he chooses to teleport out. So if we actually play the first round and the second round side by side, we can see that Teets goes for the exact same movements and peaks in both rounds. This shows an incredible amount of discipline to his consistency in his peaks. But the key factor on why this peak is a consistently good peak is because it follows one of the main principles of peaking, and that is the T rule. Shoutouts to Royal G for this T concept. And to break it down in its simplest forms, the T rule is composed of 3 important conditions that need to be met. First, you need to know where your point of contact is, also known as where is the exact location you believe your opponent will be when you do peek. Peeking is all about manipulating how we appear from the enemy's perspective. So obviously, knowing where they are located will have a massive effect on how you look on their screen. For this example, Teets' point of contact is this general area of long A. Second, we must position ourselves in a way that we face toward the general direction of our point of contact, so that all we need to do to peek into it is by strafing left or right with one movement key. This is similar to what we were discussing earlier about how Tommy would opt for diagonal movement for their peaks rather than horizontal movement. With this, we're now starting to see why this is called the T rule. If we're to visualize our ideal positioning for peeking relative to our point of contact, it creates a shape similar to the letter T, where the long line in the T is our point of contact and the short line is our own horizontal movement. And for the last condition, we must ensure that there are no objects or obstructions that may block our horizontal movement. It would defeat the whole purpose of the T rule if we weren't able to complete the T shape of the peak if there's a box or a wall in the way of our pathing. If a player who was not following this principle had wanted to peek at the same angle Teets had, they may have positioned themselves too close to the box in a lobby, blocking their movement and making their peek feel quite clunky. With this new understanding of the T rule, let's break down the step-by-step process Teets is following with these peaks. 1. Teets understands where his point of contact is, which is long A. 2. He backs up and faces himself towards long A, so that all he has to do to expose himself to that angle is strafe to the left by pressing just the A key. And 3, he consciously backs himself up so that the corner of the box next to him doesn't block his pathing for the peek. Now, on top of all of this, he even gets the added benefit of having cover from any defenders who try to peek from short A. Now, even though this peek didn't result in any kills, every peek should have the intention that you are mentally prepared to take a fight as soon as you make the peek. It's always better to be prepared for a fight and then let your guard down once you've finished peeking than peeking in the hopes of no one being there and then having to take a fight you weren't ready for. In round 21, using the T rule in combination with the slicing the pie technique we've talked about before in our previous videos, Teets finds an easy frag onto the enemy jet. Now, a lot of what makes players peeking so strong is about minimizing mistakes that introduce unwanted variables into their peeks. For our pro level, we'll be taking a look at how Demon1 puts on a peeking masterclass. Let's hop into round 9 of this split game. Roughly 15 seconds into the round, the game has stabilized into a 4v4 situation where Demon1 is positioned toward Hell, holding to see if anyone pushes out of A main. This is when the enemies make a loud footstep, indicating that at least one of them is pretty close. This is when Demon1 chooses to peek and finds a pretty clean kill onto the enemy Astra and then dashes away. Throughout this video, we've been going over mostly how to peek, but the reason why we're breaking down this exact clip from Demon1 is because of when he decides to peek. The timing at which he peeks into this Astra is absolutely amazing because he's choosing to peek when she's in this specific A main choke point. The issue that comes with being in this specific area of A main is that in order to push into the site, you're forced to move forward by pressing the W key. Something we hinted at earlier is what our movement looks like from our enemy's perspective when it comes to our peaks. Now, in theory, moving horizontally by just using our strafe keys makes us move quite fast from our opponent's perspective. But if we were to move in a straight line directly to our opponent, we're basically not moving at all, making it a much easier shot when compared to the horizontal movement. Using this to his advantage, Demon1 knew to time his peek when the enemy was in a position where they were forced to move forward by using the W key, giving him a huge advantage in the upcoming duel. How to peek is one thing here, but knowing when to peek gives you a huge step up against your opponents when it comes to determining who has better peeks. Nevertheless, round 11 is where Demon1 shows why his peeks are feared around the world. At the 1-minute 20-second mark, the enemy brings their execute onto A site by using Sky ult as well as Astra ult. And with the help of his smoke and dash, he repositions himself to elbow, and this is where the magic happens here. He fully understands that he's now in the anchor position facing a 4-man A site execute. Demon1's priorities in this position are to live as long as possible so his teammates can rotate over as well as search for any kills that will allow his team to maintain the man advantage that they have. First, he peeks towards the right side of elbow and finds an easy kill on Killjoy, who's caught blindsided and dropping from rafters. He then kills the Sky Dog and goes for a cheeky pre-fire jiggle peek towards A site. Again, Demon1 goes for another one of these quick pre-fire jiggle peeks towards Hell and then does it again towards A site, but this time finds a frag onto Viper. He tries his luck one more time with a pre-fire jiggle peek on site, but the enemy Sky hits a nice shot onto Demon1 during his dash. The priorities that we had outlined earlier were shown beautifully in every peek Demon1 made during this exchange. Each peek followed these key principles that he needed to abide by. 1. He would expose himself to only one potential point of contact with each peek, making sure that he would not peek too wide and present himself to two enemies at the same time. With peeks like these, he's able to give himself opportunities for isolated 1v1 duels, even though technically it's a 4v1 since all of the enemies are trying to fight him on site. 2. He's only peeking for a small amount of time, then unpeeking back behind cover so he can preserve his own life as much as possible so his teammates have more time to rotate. And 3, each peek he makes give him a bit of information on where the enemies are positioned, giving him a better idea of what points of contact he'll need to isolate for his future peeks. This incredible display of peeking sets his team up for a pretty easy retake, since he bought time for his teammates to rotate while also getting 2 kills to make it a 4v2 retake. The key to leveling up your peeking is understanding what your intentions with every peek need to be.